Hello and welcome to Series 4 of Autism in Conversation with Auticon, a podcast from Auticon, a global IT consultancy whose consultants are all autistic. We're here with this podcast to help raise greater understanding and appreciation of autism through fascinating conversation with fantastic guests. Hosted by me, Carrie Grant, MBE. Each episode will feature inspirational guests from all walks of life who each share a passion for making the world more inclusive. We'll be talking about the many benefits of hiring neurodivergent talent, through to some of the more common challenges faced by autistic adults navigating the workplace, plus so much more. All of my 4 children are neurodivergent, so this is a subject very close to my heart. I'm really looking forward to facilitating some great conversations about autism and hopefully learning some new things along the way. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. Now, a diagnosis of autism can often go hand in hand with a plethora of superb skills, such as pattern recognition and attention to detail. However, sadly, the employment figures for autistic people are depressingly low, with only 1 in 5 in employment. The purpose of this episode, therefore, is to shine a light on the incredible abilities that can often come alongside a diagnosis of autism. We'll also be talking about the importance of creating the right environment to enable autistic talent to shine. This should be great, this one. Now, I'm really excited about my guest today. I'm joined by Zoey Clenshaw, who's the Operations Executive at Harry Specters Chocolate, Stephanie de Kremer, IT specialist, former auticon consultant, and, wait for it, semi-pro wrestler. Yes, you heard correctly. And Bridget Young, who is the head of the Holmewood School, an independent day school for neurodivergent children. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay, so one of the things that I love about this podcast is that we get to hear from such a variety of people, and everyone brings their own unique perspective and experiences. And I think that's really important when it comes to some of the misconceptions about autism, because we know that our autistic community has so much to offer, and yet we don't really hear enough about that. So everyone on this panel today has a wealth of incredible strengths and talents, and I'd like to start off by celebrating that. Normally on this podcast, we're going, these are the blocks, these are the challenges, but this podcast is really about those strengths and how they can be utilised. So Zoey, first coming to you, I'm already very familiar with your employer, Harry Specters Chocolates. In fact, I'm a little too familiar with those chocolates. But for anyone who hasn't heard of the business, can you explain what's unique about the company that you work with?
So at Harry Specters, we basically have 2 main goals. The first being to create delicious chocolate.
Which you do very well. You've
we
ticked
do,
that box.
yes. Biased. It is the truth. But also to provide paid employment, training, and work experience opportunities for autistic people. So the majority of our workforce is autistic, like me, and autistic people are involved in all aspects of the business. So they're not just sort of quietly in the background in a corner somewhere.
Yeah.
They are actually making the chocolates, they're doing quality control, packing, admin, customer service, sales, bookkeeping, marketing, just about everything. And the majority of the profits from the chocolates that we sell go straight back into the business to help us create more opportunities for more autistic people.
That's an incredible model for business. Was it always intended to be that way, or is that just something that happened?
No, it was originally founded about 10 years ago and inspired by our founders, Mona and Shaz, their son, Ash, who is autistic, because they were worried, you mentioned sort of the employment numbers.
Yeah.
They were worried about what he would do after he'd finished education. So they wanted to create a place for people like Ash.
Yeah. And of course they have done, and plenty of others. And when we're talking about a number of autistic people, like roughly how many autistic people be working in the company?
So over the course of the 10 years, we've helped over, I think it's 330 individual autistic people, whether that's been for school work experience or they've freelanced with us or whatever it is.
That is
at the moment, we have a core team of about 11, I believe, off the top of my head. And then we have quite a few people who'll come in sort of during rush periods.
Yeah, like on a more ad hoc basis.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Tell us about your role within the organisation.
So I am the operations executive, which was originally a role that was focused on things like order fulfillment, inventory tracking, and documenting SOPs.
What's an SOP?
Standard order of procedure.
Okay.
So all the things like training documentations that we then use for new
Yeah.
people that come in.
Yeah.
I am playfully referred to as the office octopus because there are so many different things that I do. And we're actually now in the process of moving me into more of a marketing role because I'd expressed to Mona and Shaz that was something I was really interested in. And the mix of planning, being creative, and data analysis plays to my strengths.
And when you came into the company, were you thinking that you would move up in the company? What was your experience of employment before working for Harry Specters?
Awful. In a short, immediately before working there, I'd been self-employed as an artist for about 4 years, which worked quite well for me because I could do everything on my own terms.
Yeah, self-employment
obviously,
can be really good, can't it? For autistic
exactly,
people?
but not a very stable income. And I found myself in a position where it was, I really need a stable, consistent income.
Of course.
Before then, I hadn't managed to stay in a job for more than a year, just simply because of a whole variety of different specific reasons, but it generally boiled down to me trying to communicate something I was struggling with and wanting to work towards a solution.
Yeah.
And my employers not being very receptive, open to compromise, the usual sort of...
The usual stuff that we hear about.
Yeah.
And then what's the difference then when you moved over to this company? What was that and what's that been like?
I think the main difference, and there are a lot of differences, I could talk about it for an hour easily, but I won't. The main difference, I think, comes from their willingness to listen. So rather than you say to someone, take an example, I like to, or I need to sometimes wear noise-cancelling headphones.
Sure.
Particularly in a factory where you've got machines and there are people rushing about.
I can imagine.
Some employers might hear that and think, oh, she's using that as an excuse to listen to music or things and skive off work. Whereas if I say to Mona and Shaz, I can't concentrate and I need to put my headphones on, they say, okay, and they trust that I'm doing what I say I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then miraculously, I'm able to get more work done. Who would have imagined?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so funny. Who would have imagined, right?
Yes.
And we hear a lot about autistic strengths. What would you consider to be your strengths? Now, you've now worked across a few different areas of the company and still wanting to move on now to marketing. So what would you say are the strengths that you're able to really flourish in right now?
So I've narrowed it down to 3. I would say the first thing is my ability to hyperfocus mixed with a very keen eye for detail, which obviously helps when it comes to things like catching mistakes or data entry. But also I found really helpful when I need to learn something new. So if I'm put in the right environment where I can really zone in on something, you can put just about anything in front of me and I can learn it incredibly quickly and to a really high standard.
That's amazing. I love that. Were those skills, just let me ask then, were those skills recognised when you were in school?
No.
Yeah. That's what I thought you were going to say, sadly. Okay, we'll come back to that a bit later, perhaps. Stephanie, now over to you. You have 2 jobs, so let's start with your day job. Can you explain what your main profession is, please?
So right now I'm a data analyst. I was an IT consultant here at Auticon, but 2 years ago I moved across to Cognizant, where I'm doing a similar sort of techie role. Tech is just massively in demand, to be honest. Lots of Power BI, lots of Tableau, Python and R. And it's thanks to the free training courses that otherwise cost £50, £100 plus a pop. It's thanks to some of the training I received at Auticon that I'm now able to pretty much be smashing it at this new role I'm in.
That is amazing. And you also have a very successful side project as well. Tell us about that.
So I'm a professional wrestler here in the UK. I've actually wrestled in Canada as well. In 2017, I went over to Lance Storm's Wrestling Academy, which was a 3-month crazy, incredible time. I'm talking 5 days a week, like a full-time training. Kicked my bum after the first week. I felt like collapsing. But I met so many people there and First Nations people as well who really love wrestling. And I brought those skills here back to the UK and I'm wrestling pretty much all around. This weekend, tomorrow, I've got a wrestling show up in Leeds, and then the day after, one in Coventry. And I have 2 women's championship belts right now. I don't believe we're recording camera, but if anyone wants to follow me, Kiara, Kiara _wrestling. You can see my lovely pink belt from CWE and my lovely green belt from CPW.
Wow. Now, that's 2 very different worlds you've described there, and you're really successful in both of them. How would you say that being autistic helps you with these roles?
Being one of the many women that have been diagnosed late in life, one of the very common themes is masking. Because we've gone our whole lives not really figuring out why we're different. We've kind of had to act like chameleons. We can be social chameleons. Sometimes the men have this issue too, but I've noticed, particularly with the women, like other women at Auticon I've had the pleasure of working with. So a lot of the skills being autistic actually are super fun. Like, you're so used to fitting in that you actually develop some fantastic acting abilities. And I use the acting abilities to sort of portray different characters. One of the most popular characters right now is a very snooty, mean, evil Kate Middleton, basically, which they hate me up north. I think because I really turn on the accent. I really make it even more obnoxious. Oh, hello, peasants. Oh, I won't high five you as I come to the crowd. And they hate it. So I'd say it's some of my skills from growing up autistic that allow me to really nail it acting in wrestling. One of the other strengths of being autistic is amazing attention to detail. In the recruitment process when I first joined Auticon, which, by the way, side note, is not scary at all. It was the nicest recruitment process. So as I go into this, picture a super friendly atmosphere. But one of the little tests, one of many different options, you don't have to do all of them, but one of the tests was pattern recognition and noticing tiny little errors, which in other jobs can get you in trouble. People could say, oh, you're fussing too much, Stephanie. Oh, why do you always have to nitpick? Why do you always have to be the odd one out? A lot of people who are autistic get told things like that, when actually in tech, that's an amazing skill. And we have the focus. One of my roles just before Auticon, the very previous role to that, was for the Cambridge Alumni Office, where I was looking at thousands of addresses from all over the world, all these alumni, and noticing tiny errors in spelling, punctuation, or like the Hong Kong addresses, which are all formatted really weirdly. So being able to comb through thousands, tens of thousands of lines of data with the focus and like weirdly kind of enjoying it and getting that gratification, whether that's lines of data or writing your own code, those sort of innate strengths we have on the spectrum help amazingly in tech type roles that I'm doing now at Cognizant.
My goodness. And Bridget, we come to you. You run a school which is set up to support neurodivergent children. We'll come on to the importance of the support shortly, but before we do that, I'd like you to just share some insight from your side about the myriad ways that we see the ability in disability shine through when it comes to autistic people.
Yeah, so ability shines through when autistic people are allowed to focus on their passions and when they can be given a chance to make a good impression on people.
Isn't that what Zoey said?
Yeah,
exactly. That.
It was really resonating with me and it's nice to see that workplace. We might be able to actually do some of the things that we're kind of supporting them to go off and do. But yeah, I think it's important for young people to be given a chance to develop their voice as well, so that they can use it to work with people, explain their access arrangements like you were suggesting, Zoe, and use their voice to make their mark on the world with their specific or unique genius that they might.
And you really are very good at that. I have to just disclose that one of my children is in your school. But in terms of, I think 2 things I notice there, and you've touched on both. And the first is finding your voice. I think that for many children, parents have had to speak for their younger children because their younger children are just trying to navigate a world that seems to be set up in a totally different way. But then there comes a point where I know as a parent, I want to switch that over. I want my child to be able to advocate. How do you go about doing that? How do you help them to find their voice?
We're going to talk about that, aren't we? But I would say that there's a few elements to it. Ultimately, we have to provide a place where neurodivergent people want to be.
Yeah.
And we need to kind of create a physical and emotional environment that fosters belonging, acceptance.
Yes. Belonging is such a big word. Belonging. What are your thoughts on that, Zoe? I know that for the children that I have and the people that I work with, I'm thinking, if you're in an environment where there are other autistic people, not exclusively, but it's just a mixture. Does that feel different to the other environments that you may have found yourself in the past?
Yes, I think so. I, both in work and in my personal life, quite a large chunk of my friend group is autistic, ADHD, or has dyslexia or some other sort of
divergence, as it were.
Yeah, neurodivergence. And I tend to find that because obviously you're aware that your brain works in a different way, it's a lot easier for other people whose brains also work in a slightly different way to take you at face value.
Yes.
Rather than, I've had a lot of problems where I'll say something and I'm always very direct in what I'm saying. And then they'll try and look for the hidden meaning behind it. But there's no hidden meaning behind it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not capable of doing that. If I'm saying something, I'm saying it as it is. There's no weird, sneaky, hidden, ulterior motive.
Yeah, you're saying it as it is. The world is a much simpler place when if everyone could just talk like that, please, that would be great.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I would love that.
Okay, so moving on, I'd like us to talk about having the right supports in place and the difference that it can make when it comes to enabling autistic people to truly, completely thrive. Stephanie, I'll come to you first. You were diagnosed when you were 22. Can you talk about how things were going for you at that time?
That is it's a heavy question for me. I'm happy to answer it, but things were strange. I had gotten into my dream university, and when you get into your dream uni, you think, great, the hard part's over. A-levels are over. Finally, I can enjoy uni life. But I wasn't quite clicking. It wasn't quite working. And I was with other sort of engineering, sciencey, techie people. I was with other quote-unquote nerds. But even then, something wasn't right. And that, to me, was the strangest thing. Like, for instance, any big life change for someone on the spectrum, especially like primary school to secondary school, is the hardest. So when I was 12, that was one of the hardest points of my life. And again, transitioning from A-levels to university, one of the hardest points of my life. University to regular life jobs, one of the hardest points. Any big change. I went from getting firsts in some of my papers to low thirds and not graded. I'm not exaggerating. And I was thinking, what's wrong with me? On paper, I feel like I'm trying my best. And it was actually the social side, like losing your debit card 6 times in your first year and having to borrow 50 quid from the university safe, which they keep for emergencies. And I joined the athletic society, but I wasn't clicking with the other girls. And I thought, what's wrong with me? That feeling of what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Am I just making a fuss of this? Am I just being pretentious? Am I being ungrateful? These are the same thoughts that people have when they know something's wrong. It's the same when right before people get diagnosed with depression, they think, oh, there's people that have it worse than me. Who am I to feel sad when there's people that don't have enough to eat? So this feeling of what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And I do remember when I finally got it, because I had lots of misconceptions about what autism was. And when I finally got it, I remember I cried so hard that evening, but it was happy tears.
Oh my goodness. And once you had your diagnosis, what happened then?
Once I had the diagnosis, I was given so much support. I had a coach, a disability coach. Joining a disability centre, that took a long time to adjust to, because I was like, I'm not disabled. You know what? You can be. And I was given so much help. And breaking down a big, unmanageable task, when someone gives you a task, there's a lot of unwritten rules. Okay, I'm not just talking uni, I'm talking about regular jobs. Someone could give you a task and there's a lot of implied instructions, but the instructions aren't put sequentially in front of you like you might have when you're in secondary school. No, there's a lot of implied things you're supposed to do. And I was not getting that. So I remember her name was Kitty, shout out to Kitty. I don't remember her surname, but she also did dyslexia coaching. And she gave me tips about color coordinating work, keeping on top, and personal skills. You don't have homework diaries. You don't have a teacher checking you signed your homework diary every week, which you do at secondary school. And having all that support, as well as being able to take exams in a quieter area from the sensory aspect, taking an exam in a massive hall with loads of people I don't know, you could just hear a pin drop, right? And your brain focuses in on the sneeze next to you and you're like, shut up. But being able to do it in a slightly smaller room with less people, again, that massively changed my grade. And it's the same with auticon. Auticon was amazing. Each time I changed project, they would give me the support. We'd scope out, me and Russell would scope out what the new office would look like. Oh, is there a fluorescent light there? Are there any sensory things here? So having someone to advocate for you and having that extra layer of support it's like a 5% difference in your external environment, and it equates to a bajillion% feeling of being happy.
How did you first come across auticon?
So let's see, what year would this have been? So I joined auticon in 2018, September 2018. So I found out about auticon because a therapist I was working with told me about it. He was like, I think you'd be a lot happier in a job that actually values you. And at the time, my confidence was so low. I thought I took a knock at university before I could adjust. But then getting into the real world, again, another beast. And I just thought, oh, maybe I should have stayed in academia, the academia quote unquote bubble where you're protected. Maybe the real world isn't right for me. Yeah, my confidence was super low. And my therapist was like, oh, there's this company called auticon, and they specifically hire and look for consultants who are on the spectrum. And I thought, I don't know. And then I looked it up, and the website was super friendly, and they're disability confident, right? So many companies will just slap disability confident on the website to tick a box. But auticon at every step of the recruitment process was like, actually I can't swear on this, but actually cared about you.
Can you explain how things then changed for you?
So I was given a job coach. I had Russell. And the point of the job coach, they're not your line manager. So your line manager is kind of your day-to-day technical, the actual job. But the additional allocation of a job coach, what did we do? We talked about different things each week. We kind of have a weekly check-in. For instance, in London, as I'd commute in, I'd have, when you bump shoulders, just the everyday hustle and bustle. In my head, I had this rule that you're not allowed to touch anyone ever in public. I don't really know where I got that rule from, but that's an example of a strange thought that was stressing me out, because anytime someone grazed my shoulder and got in my bubble, I was like, getting super het up. Whereas Russell was telling me this is normal. Bus seats aren't designed with a big space like train seats are. Bus seats are a lot closer than train seats, and it's okay if your arm is kind of touching someone else. It's normal in a big city like London. And he would take me through things that were stressing me out. Sometimes we talk about spoons. You have so many spoons a day before you run out. Or I also like to think of a battery. Imagine a Duracell battery. And my battery was draining faster than it should have done. And with Russell and with the job coaches, they help you. You can never completely get rid of the sensory aspect, but they help you deal with it in a new way. And so I changed the thought of, oh, this is normal. It's okay. And then suddenly my battery wouldn't drain as much as it did before.
That's incredible. What would you say you've taken forward as a result of that?
I think there are lots of misconceptions people on the spectrum have. It works both ways, right? People have misconceptions about autistic people, but then people who are autistic also have misconceptions about how they should behave and what the world expects from them. It really goes both ways. So I noticed this a lot, is we all put so much pressure on ourselves. We're so used to being in environments where we're not accepted and we're the weird ones that we carry that over. We carry that baggage over that we don't need to. We really don't need to. Like, the world is improving. I've noticed this, especially in the last 3 years. And the big takeaways are that when you are in a safe space, you can let your guard down. If you're fiddling with a little stress ball, that's okay. No one's going to shout at you or give you a side eye. You're in an environment where you can do that. And auticon, I won't name drop the kind of projects I was in, but the projects I had were so good and helped me with my confidence. And Andrea, I remember we had a little presentation together that we were doing, and he called me an expert on it. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess people do see me that way. And it's so weird because you have your own self-concept, your own idea of how you are to people that changing that slowly. It's a process, but after my 2 years at Auticon, I think I made big progress.
Zoe, coming over to you. How old were you when you were diagnosed?
So I was 31. I was actually diagnosed last year, April 2022.
I was about to say, you only look like you're in your 20s now.
I get that a lot, but thank you. Yeah, so April 2022, age of 31 after 4 years on the waiting list.
Oh my goodness. And did you know from a younger age, though, that you were autistic? Did you have a sense of that, or did that come as a surprise?
So there's a lot of autism in my family.
Yeah.
But so for me, I was a quote unquote gifted child. My speech was advanced. It was very early, as was my reading. And because, of course, we're talking 1990, a lot of the information we had about autism was based on it's boys,
of course,
and they don't talk. So those two things immediately sort of made me think, oh, I can't be autistic.
Yeah.
But I always very much knew I was different. I used to think I was maybe, when I was very small, I used to look out my window at night because I was convinced I was obviously some kind of alien, and maybe my real parents would come and take me to the planet I'm supposed to be on.
Wow.
Because I knew I was different from my peers.
The thing that I find hearing you say that is that could have been a paragraph that could have come out of my 21-year-old's experience. I think that Ty did exactly the same, looked out the window and went, I'm definitely an alien, I don't belong.
Yeah.
But again, it's that belonging word, isn't it? I don't belong here. The world isn't set up for me. What impact did it have on your life when that's only a year ago as well? What were your initial thoughts and feelings about the diagnosis?
So prior to my diagnosis, because I was on the waiting list for a while, I was already doing a lot of research to try and kind of understand myself better, because once it clicked for me that this was obviously what was going on, there was no doubt in my mind. So I didn't expect the actual diagnosis to have much of an impact. But interestingly, I found there was something very validating for me. And I appreciate that obviously diagnosis isn't accessible or desired for everyone.
Sure.
But for me, there was something validating about having that in writing.
Yeah.
And having that confirmation that I was right, I know my own mind and I know who I am. And that has, as a result, given me more confidence to be able to live more authentically, my kind of authentic autistic self.
Yeah.
And to be more vocal about requesting accommodations where I need them, rather than constantly trying to force myself into this neurotypical mask.
Yeah.
And pushing myself too hard only to go home and have a meltdown and not be able to function anymore.
We often talk about the fact that just because someone can hyperfocus for 15 hours in a row doesn't mean that they should.
No.
Because I think that's often something that happens is that we go, oh, we've got this incredible autistic talent, and they'll just work day and night. How great is that? That's great for a business. Yeah, it might be great for a business, but that's not going to be good. Even if the person can do we need to give people those breaks and make sure they have those adjustments. Now, for you working at Harry Specters, what has happened there that has made you feel like, yeah, this works for me? Why does it work for you, and how does it work for you? How have you been able to thrive?
Sort of touched on it a little bit already, but I'm a person with a very strong work ethic. I take a lot of pride in my work. I like to be sure that I'm doing the absolute best I can in everything I do.
Yeah.
And I love being able to go into work completely confident in the fact that I can do my job in the way I need to do it. There has never been an issue with accommodations, for example, with headphones or needing to step outside for a few minutes or having things on my desk to kind of fidget with, or working from home like I am today. And in fact, not only is there not an issue with, but I'm quite often actively encouraged.
Oh, see, that's a whole new level, isn't it? That's not just adjustment, that's an encouragement.
Getting quite clearly visibly overwhelmed and having your boss turn around to you and go, what are you doing? Go outside for a walk. Go on, you need to go outside, and actively encouraging you to take the steps that you need to take is just so far out of anything else I've experienced at any workplace previously.
Wow, that's so encouraging to hear. I hope that people that have workplace settings that lead in that area can hear the truth of that, because it clearly makes a difference. And Bridget, I've seen firsthand the impact that having tailored support makes to a neurodivergent child, because I know that my child has thrived at your school. Can you talk us through your approach at the school and why it's so important?
I've mentioned that you have to try and make it a place where autistic people want to be. So for teens, I suppose that's a cool place. And for kids, it's a nurturing, fun place with the right boundaries. And yeah, it's a setting of mutual empathy and understanding, I think. We encourage staff and students to be themselves, but at the same time, of course, helping them to strive to be better.
When you talk about staff there, can we just because staff, including yourself,
Right.
it's like you don't look like any staff that I've ever seen in any school.
I also get that a lot, yeah.
So the recruitment process, which I don't know if you're across that, but is there a different way of hiring staff in the schools?
No, not really. Whenever I interview somebody, I think we have all of these questions, and over the years, I've really not really enjoyed sitting there asking questions of people because I find it very kind of laboured. And what I've realised is it's just best to get to know somebody and see what they bring, because I suppose you can read about their credentials on a piece of paper.
That's not necessarily who they are, though.
No, right. And that's actually quite important. And so we don't always recruit people who have a huge knowledge of autism or who have a huge experience in SEN, because we think that it's really important we can train them to be the way that we want them to be in the school.
That's an interesting view, because we have talked about that on this podcast, maybe not exactly that, but that thing of sometimes it's easier to take someone who knows nothing than it is to try and undo what someone thinks they know. I can see that you're nodding away there, Zoe.
Yep.
And what about finding those gifts and skills and assets that sit within young people? I always feel like that can start really young. That isn't something that you should have to discover when you're 30.
Yeah. The thing is, it's interesting. We find that sometimes our students don't necessarily get the qualifications and get the grades that would match their abilities for various reasons, often barriers that are around the actual process of exams and things like that.
That needs to change. Whoever's listening, if you've got any influence changing exams, just do it.
We're
please.
working on it, Carrie.
Yeah.
At Holmewood. But what we think is flexible pathways are really important. But if we go back to what I was saying about the environment, as long as you're taking away some of the stresses that might stop them from being able to be themselves and hide their gifts, you take that away and all of a sudden these things become quite apparent. We've got an example of a young girl who was really bright, very complex, initially struggled a lot, but via the school rock band, which you know about, it was a student-led idea to have a rock band, but she found her voice in recording music and really finding a pathway that shows her a bright future, as opposed to focusing on this cookie cutter education that everyone.
Factory.
Yeah.
And what about, talk me through, because one of the things I didn't know until I came into contact with your school, talk me through how students do sixth form, because it's done in a slightly different way, isn't it? Can you explain that?
It's completely, we used to say bespoke, the word that we got another word for it now, which has just escaped me. Bespoke will do. By that point, we try and get them through a few GCSEs, but we can be flexible on the timings of those. And we really then do some person-centered planning to find out what exactly they're interested in. And by that point, we help them build a career path. But that's interesting, isn't it? Because they don't always know what they want to do. So it might be about trying things in a safe environment and then realizing that it's wrong and realizing that's okay, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then moving on to the next thing. Because some of them, of course, know straight away what they want to do, and others find that really difficult. And actually, we've had some situations where the not knowing has been so profound that it's caused a lot of mental health difficulties.
Yeah.
But then finding it has been the key to the self-knowledge that can help them understand the bright future that we're talking about.
So as students, they also can go to college but still be in the school.
Yes.
Can you just explain that? Because I didn't even know that was available.
Every student has a different timetable. They might have finished English and maths, for example, but they might still be working on history. And so we've got partnerships with a few local colleges that we've built relationships with that know our kids, they know our staff, and they know our way of working. And so then we take our students with trained members of staff into the colleges to access mainstream education supported. And so in that respect, we can really specialise a little bit more. And it also supports them to go back into a more mainstream environment because our school's a little bit of a bubble.
It's like a heavenly bubble. Your school is like it's like now you're going to go to the real world. Yeah, an oasis. You go back into the real world where it's really difficult. So I love this idea that you've got like the hub of their friendship groups. Those things remain. They can go out in different ways and then come back to that.
Yes, yeah. I suppose because they won't always have that outside, I think it's quite important to support them to understand how to make that outside as well.
But friendships can be super hard. How have you found that, Zoe? You're nodding away there. Friendships can be hard for our autistic people, right?
Yes, it was not a skill that I had growing up. It's gotten easier in adulthood. I think simply because I have a better understanding of myself.
Yeah.
And I'm very open, because one thing I've found is when I talk very openly about being autistic, people who maybe have recently discovered that they are autistic or might be autistic sort of think, oh, maybe I can talk. I haven't felt confident to talk to other people about this, but I can talk to Zoe about it.
Yeah.
And I found that happens quite a lot. So I'm always very open. And when I meet people, I will just tell them. And then I tend to find they either sort of go, oh, okay, don't know anything about that. And then they sort of quietly leave, or they're more open to actually forming a friendship based on kind of understanding, respect.
Being curious.
Yes,
Curious about
exactly. I love when people ask me questions. I'm very happy to be asked questions about how I experience things.
If you were looking back at your childhood, Zoe, and you were to see a young girl growing up, and you know how sometimes autistic people just have a radar for other autistic people. So if you were to like see that, I don't know, 5 or 10-year-old girl, let's say, and they didn't have a diagnosis and they were you back then, as it were, what would you want to say to that child?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for me at that point, the important thing would have been to know that I'm not the only person that thinks and feels like this.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't until I sought out diagnosis because I read, it was actually a BBC article about late diagnosed autistic women. And that was the first time, this was about 5.5 years ago now.
Yeah, I remember
that was the first time I'd read that was non-fictional, where I actually related to people. That was the first time in my life that I have ever read something written that's non-fiction and actually related to it. So I think being able to go back to that child and say, actually, look, here is some proof. It's not you, and you're not alone in how you think, would have made the world of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I had a feeling that's what you might say. So many of our autistic community as adults just say that. I wish that someone had said to me, this is not you. This is just, the world is not made for, not set up. It's made, but it's not set up for you to prosper. But that doesn't mean you can't prosper. That doesn't mean you can't thrive. And that you haven't got gifts, they're just sitting there. Okay, so let's look to the future. It's great to be able to share these sort of positive examples and ways that we can bring about change for our autistic community. And thank you so much for sharing all your experiences. They are truly inspiring. Finally, I'd like to use this final section to look ahead to the future and what each of you would like to see happen. So first, let's go to Stephanie. 10 years from now, what changes would you like to see that would help autistic people to lead better lives?
Okay, so if someone is hard of hearing, no one's going to go up to them and say, oh, you don't look hard of hearing, or oh, you don't seem. One of the things we get a lot is, oh, you don't look, oh, don't worry, you're not autistic, and oh, you don't look autistic. Like it's so hard to challenge because you can kind of tell it's coming from a nice place. Like they're not being overtly mean, but it's just, oh, trust me, I am. Like, I definitely am. So I think, again, it's hard to educate people on that because it's coming from a nice place. They're not necessarily being mean. It's just adjusting that behavior of being autistic isn't just one thing. It is a spectrum. It's not just being Rain Man. Like, it is definitely a whole bunch of different things, okay? The same with Tourette's, right? People think Tourette's is just swearing. Now, I don't have Tourette's, but there's lots of people who have a bajillion other tics that are not swearing, okay? Some disabilities are not just one thing. In 10 years, if people stopped asking me that and trying to reassure me that I'm not autistic when I know I am, it would help me come out more. At Brawl, which was a brand new wrestling promotion I worked at earlier this month, there was 4 other wrestlers on the roster who were all autistic. 3 of them, in addition to myself, so 5, 3 of them, and I won't name names, I don't know if they want to be out, 3 of them were only diagnosed this year, okay? and none of them looked autistic. And some of these are big guys, right? Big, muscly gym bros. Okay, they can be autistic too. So that's personally what I'd quite like a difference in.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, so to Zoey, you're looking at the landscape 10 years from now. All those little people that we were just talking about have all grown up. They're all mid-uni. You're then 40-something. What would you like the world to look like by then?
I think we're sort of starting to get there, to see more conversation around the actual autistic experience and starting to remove some of that stigma. I do think there's a long way to go still, because I think that's really what is at the core in terms of barriers to real meaningful change.
Yeah.
And I think once neurotypical people understand the realities around autism and hear and process more about the autistic experience from autistic people themselves, then they can engage themselves and start to feel more comfortable and confident in asking questions, learning, and making adjustments and accommodations that would then allow those autistic people not just to function, but to actually thrive.
Yeah.
And as a result, I think autistic people would hopefully feel more comfortable seeking out those accommodations, rather than, I know I quite often feel like I'm being a burden by asking. But again, if it's a more widely accepted, more widely understood thing, it becomes the same as having to get glasses, which you don't even think of as an accommodation in a day-to-day life, but it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Zoe. And Bridget, as someone who is bringing young people through they're the most difficult years, the 11 to 19, do you go? I hope you got 19. To 19, yes. Otherwise I've got a problem. Bringing children through those tricky ages. What would you like to see? If you were to look at education in 10 years, what would you like to see?
I'll carry on from what Zoe said, actually, and say that I think I'd like to see neurotypicals take a little bit more responsibility for making the effort to accommodate the neurodiverse population. This includes giving people a second chance, either not taking things on first impressions or giving them the chance to shine as who they are, and putting in arrangements to support them to access whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, whether that be school or the workplace. I think that would be true autism acceptance, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would like to see, because neurotypical is currently neuropredominant. That's not to say it will always be neuropredominant. I've talked about this before. It could be that neurotypicals will need to go and get an assessment and get diagnosed for being neurotypical. Because there's so many autistic brains, and that's the neuropredominant one, neurotype. And so I suppose what I would love to see is the playing field being level, just because we just accept naturally that there are lots of different types of brain, that those different types of brain exist.
Interestingly, what works for autistic people in education will actually work for everybody.
Agreed.
So you could flip it around, couldn't you, and have our way of working be the way that we do.
Let's do it. Let's do it right here, right now. Let's put on a show. Thank you so much for being my guest today, Stephanie, Zoe and Bridget. You've been amazing and really inspiring as always. Thank you, and speak to you soon. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. If you'd like to know more about the podcast, would be interested in applying for a job as an Auticon consultant, or would like further information about how Auticon can help support your business, please visit auticon.co.uk. This episode was recorded in March 2023. Recording and production was at Strathmore Studios in Clerkenwell, London. It was engineered by Alex Brown and Jonas Gustafsson. Edited by Billy Godfrey, and music was by The Lethargies. That's all from us this time. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.